The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched high above the delegates, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 1,000 stars. Taesung stood at the human podium, his dark suit pressed perfectly, his hands folded calmly before him. Around the circular room, representatives from 40 different species watched, him with varying degrees of interest and contempt. He had been speaking, for 20 minutes, about Earth's request for trade routes through established galactic territories. His voice remained steady and professional, even as several delegates openly talked among themselves, ignoring his words completely. Behind him, Jiwoo stood with a datapad, her role as his aide requiring her to remain silent. But she watched everything. She had worked with Taesung for 6 months now, and something about him always felt wrong. Not bad wrong, dangerous wrong, the way he never seemed surprised by anything. The way his eyes tracked movement in a room like he was calculating trajectories. A loud hiss interrupted Taesung's presentation. Vextar, the reptilian ambassador from the Draxian Empire, rose from his elevated seat. His scales gleamed green and gold under the chamber lights, and his forked tongue flickered with amusement. Enough of this waste of time, Vextar announced, his translator converting his speech into galactic standard. Why does the Council continue to entertain these primates? They have been part of our civilization for barely 3 years. 3 years! Some of us have children older than their entire space program. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Calroon, the insectoid representative of the Hive Collective, clicked his mandibles together in what Taesung had learned was their version of mockery. Taesung stood perfectly still. His expression didn't change. He simply waited for the laughter to die down. "If I may continue," he said quietly. "You may not," Vextar interrupted. He descended from his seat, his clawed feet clicking on the polished floor as he approached the human podium. "Your species wants access to trade routes that took us centuries to establish. Trade routes we defend with our fleets. And what does Earth offer in return? Primitive fusion drives, chemical propulsion, music and literature from a death world no one cares about?" Taesung met Vextar's eyes. The Draxian stood nearly 7 feet tall, his muscular frame designed by evolution to dominate. Taesung, at 6 feet, looked almost fragile by comparison. "Earth offers partnership," Taesung replied, "and the resources of our system, including rare Earth elements that—" Vextar's tail whipped forward, striking the datapad on Taesung's podium. The device flew across the room and shattered against a wall. Then, with deliberate malice, Vextar picked up a container from his belt and poured its contents over Taesung's carefully prepared documents. The liquid hissed and bubbled, eating through the paper like acid. "Oops," Vextar said, his mouth pulling back to show rows of sharp teeth. "How clumsy of me." More laughter. Even some of the more neutral delegates couldn't hide their amusement. Jiwoo took a step forward, her fists clenched, but Taesung raised one hand slightly. A tiny gesture. She stopped immediately. Taesung looked down at his destroyed documents. Smoke rose from the dissolving paper. Then he looked back up at Vextar. His face remained completely neutral. No anger. No fear, nothing. "Accidents happen," Taesung said softly. Something about his tone made Jiwoo's skin prickle. She had heard that voice before once, when a drunk alien in a station bar had grabbed her arm too roughly. Taesung had appeared from nowhere and spoken to the man in that same quiet voice. The alien had released her and practically run away. Vextar leaned closer to Taesung. "Your species doesn't belong here, human. You're soft, weak. You evolved on a planet with no real predators, and it shows. Go back to your little blue world and play in your gardens. Leave the galaxy to those strong enough to hold it." "No real predators," Taesung repeated as if tasting the words. "I see. This petition is denied," Calroon announced from his seat. "The Hive Collective votes no. We will not share our territory with primitives who can barely leave their own star system." One by one, the other delegates voted. 40 voices, 40 refusals. Not a single species supported Earth's request. Taesung gathered what remained of his documents. Jiwoo moved to help him, and as she got closer, she noticed something. His hands weren't shaking at all. Most humans would be trembling with anger or humiliation after such treatment. Taesung's hands were perfectly steady, moving with mechanical precision. "Thank you for your time," Taesung said to the assembly. His voice carried across the chamber with that same unsettling calm. "Earth accepts the Council's decision. We will pursue other options." He turned to leave. Jiwoo followed. relieved to be getting out of this hostile place. They had almost reached the chamber doors when Vextar's voice boomed behind them. "One more thing, human." Taesung stopped. He didn't turn around. Heavy footsteps approached from behind. Jiwoo glanced back and saw Vextar striding toward them, his tail swishing with obvious pleasure at the humiliation he had inflicted. "Perhaps this will help you remember your place," Vextar said. His clawed hand swung in a wide arc. The blow cut Taesung across the face with enough force to stagger a normal human. Taesung's head snapped to the side. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, a bright red line against his pale skin. The chamber fell silent. Completely, utterly silent. Physical assault of a diplomat was forbidden under galactic law. Everyone knew this, but Vextar's confidence suggested he didn't care. What would the humans do? They had no fleet here. No leverage. No power. Taesung slowly turned his head back to face forward. He raised one hand and wiped the blood from his mouth with his thumb. He looked at the red stain for a moment, then turned to face Vextar. Jiwoo saw his face and felt ice run down her spine. He was smiling. Not a friendly smile, not even an angry smile. It was the smile of someone who had just received permission for something they had been waiting to do. "That was unwise," Taesung said quietly. The words hung in the air. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Something in that simple statement carried a weight that made even the most arrogant representatives pause. Vextar laughed, but it sounded forced. "Is that a threat, little human?" Taesung tilted his head slightly, studying Vextar the way a scientist might study an interesting insect. "No," he said. "Just an observation." He turned back to the doors. "Come, Jiwoo. We have work to do." As they left the chamber, Jiwoo risked one glance back. The delegates were already returning to their conversations, dismissing the incident. But she noticed one figure standing apart from the others. Ambassador Sora, the senior human diplomat who had requested Taesung for this assignment, watched from a private observation box. And she was smiling. Outside the chamber in the quiet corridor, Jiwoo finally spoke. "Are you okay?" "That cut looks—" "I'm fine," Taesung interrupted. He was walking with measured steps, his breathing controlled. "Contact Hyejin. Tell her we need to meet in the secure room. Priority 1. What are we going to do?" Taesung stopped walking. He turned to look at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression showed something other than calm neutrality. His eyes were cold, calculating, and utterly merciless. "We're going to teach the Galactic Council a lesson about humans," he said. "We're going to show them what real predators look like." The secure room in the human embassy was small and windowless. Walls made of material that blocked all signals, and scanning prevented anyone from listening in. Jiwoo sat at the metal table, watching Hyejin work at a console. The security chief's fingers moved quickly across holographic displays, pulling up files with red security markers all over them. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Jiwoo asked. Her voice echoed slightly in the empty space. "Taesung said we need to meet urgently, then disappeared to his quarters." Hyejin didn't look up from her work. "What do you know about our diplomat's background?" "Not much. His file says he was in government service before this assignment. Some kind of administrative position on Mars. His file lies." Hyejin tapped a final command and a new display appeared. "What I'm showing you is classified. If you repeat any of this, we'll both end up in prison. Understand?" Jiwoo nodded slowly. The display showed a military record, but not a normal service record. The dates went back 20 years. The missions listed had titles like Operation Silent Blade and Extraction Protocol Omega. Most of the details were blacked out, marked as classified even within this already classified file. At the top, a name, Lieutenant Commander Taesung. And below that, a call sign that made Jiwoo's blood run cold. The Reaper. During Earth's resource wars, Hyejin explained, several nations fought over the remaining water and mineral deposits. The fighting lasted 12 years. It was brutal. Civilian casualties reached the millions. She pulled up images of devastated cities and burned landscapes. Special operations units were formed to end conflicts quickly. Surgical strikes, hostage rescue, elimination of enemy leadership. Taesung led the most effective unit in the entire war. Jiwoo stared at the photos now appearing on screen. They showed a younger Taesung, but his eyes had the same cold, calculating look. In one image, he stood among his unit, 12 soldiers in black armor. In another, he received a medal from the Earth Coalition president. His unit conducted 47 operations. Hyejin continued. 47. They succeeded in every single one. 0 failed missions. But the methods they used... She trailed off, pulling up after-action reports. They didn't just fight. They psychologically destroyed their targets first. Taesung would spend weeks studying enemy commanders, learning their habits, their fears. Then he'd exploit those fears until his targets were already defeated mentally before his team even arrived. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand who you're working for. That mild-mannered diplomat who lets aliens insult him. That's not who he really is. That's a role he's playing. The door opened. Taesung entered and Jiwoo barely recognized him. He'd changed out of his diplomatic suit into dark, practical clothing. His face looked different somehow, harder. The mask of civility had fallen away. Behind him came Ambassador Sora, the senior diplomat who technically outranked everyone at the station. She nodded to both women and took a seat at the table. "Show her," Sora said to Hyejin. Another display appeared. This one showed communications between Earth Command and the embassy. Messages sent months before Taesung even arrived at the station. Jiwoo read them, her hands trembling slightly. "Earth predicted this," she whispered. "You knew they'd treat us like this." "We strongly suspected," Sora confirmed. "Humanity is new to galactic civilization. Every new species gets tested. The question was how brutal that test would be." She looked at Taesung. "We sent someone who could endure the humiliation until they crossed a line. Someone who could document everything. Someone who could respond appropriately when that line was finally crossed." "And Vextar crossed it," Taesung said. His voice remained quiet, but there was a quality to it now that made Jiwoo's skin crawl. "Physical assault of a diplomat is a violation of galactic law. The station security footage shows everything. 40 witnesses. Completely unprovoked attack. What are you going to do?" Jiwoo asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Taesung pulled up a new display. It showed a complex legal document. Galactic law allows for personal defense when a diplomat is attacked. The definition of defense is left intentionally vague to account for different species' customs. Some species duel, some file lawsuits, some demand blood payment, and humans can be very creative. He turned to Sora. "I received the coded message." "Protocols are released?" Sora nodded. "Earth Command gives you full discretion. Handle this however you see fit. Show them what it costs to attack humanity, but stay within legal boundaries." "Always do," Taesung replied. Jiwoo watched him pull up blueprints of the station. He studied them with intense focus, his fingers tracing routes and passages. She noticed his hands moving in small patterns, like he was already planning movements through the corridors. "What was your nickname?" she asked suddenly. "During the war." Hyejin mentioned something. Taesung glanced at her. "The Reaper. Why?" "Because my targets never saw me coming. They'd just wake up one day and discover their entire command structure had been neutralized overnight. Their people called it being harvested by death." He returned his attention to the blueprints. "I didn't particularly like the name, but it served a psychological purpose." Hyejin opened a secure communication channel. "I have an incoming transport. Should arrive in 6 hours. Your requested equipment. And Minseo? She's on that transport. Said she wouldn't miss this for anything." Jiwoo saw the faintest hint of a smile on Taesung's face. "Good. I'll need someone I trust watching my back." "Who's Minseo?" Jiwoo asked. "My former second-in-command," Taesung said. "We served together for 8 years. If I'm the Reaper, she's the one who always made sure I had the right tools to harvest." Ambassador Sora stood. "I'll be making a formal complaint to the council about the assault. That will keep them distracted with legal proceedings. It will also establish your right to defend yourself. What you do with that right is your business." "Understood." Taesung finally looked up from the displays. "I need 48 hours. You have 72. After that, Earth expects a resolution one way or another." Sora left the room. Hyejin followed, muttering something about preparing security protocols. That left Jiwoo alone with Taesung. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have been more honest with you about my background. You deserve to know who you were working with. Are you really going to hurt him? Vextar? I'm going to destroy him." Taesung said it matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. "Not just physically." That would be too quick, too merciful. I'm going to dismantle everything he's built on this station. His reputation, his alliances, his sense of security, and when he's completely isolated and terrified, when he understands the magnitude of his mistake, then I'll show him what it means to strike a human. That's... Jiwoo struggled to find words. That's terrifying. Yes, Taesung agreed. It is, that's the point. The Galactic Council thinks humans are weak because we're diplomatic. They think civility equals vulnerability. They need to understand that our diplomacy is a choice, not a weakness. And when we choose differently... He trailed off, returning to his blueprints. Jiwoo watched him work for several minutes. His focus was absolute. Every movement economical. She thought about the mild-mannered diplomat who had endured hours of mockery and insults without showing any emotion. That man was gone. Or maybe he'd never really existed. Can I help? She finally asked. Taesung looked up, surprised. This isn't your fight. You're my assignment. Where you go, I go. That's my job. He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. I need you to monitor council communications. Every message Vexitar sends, every meeting he takes. I need to know his schedule, his habits, his routine. Can you do that? I can access the diplomatic channels easily enough. Good, start with that. He pulled up another display. I'm going to begin Phase 1 tonight. Psychological pressure. By morning, Vexitar should start feeling uncomfortable. Within 48 hours, he'll be paranoid. And then what? Taesung's expression became distant, his eyes focusing on something only he could see. Then I'll show the galaxy why humans survived on a death world long enough to reach the stars. We didn't get here by being peaceful. We got here by being the most dangerous predators our planet ever produced, and learning to channel that danger into civilization. He stood and moved toward the door. Get some rest, Jiwoo. Tomorrow is going to be interesting. And if you want to back out, now's the time. I'm in, she said immediately. Then welcome to the hunt. Vexitar woke to silence. That was the first sign something was wrong. His quarters on Kepler 9 station typically hummed with the ambient noise of life support systems and his personal environmental controls. Now nothing. He rose from his sleeping platform, his scales rustling in the darkness. The emergency lighting should have activated automatically. It hadn't. He moved toward the door control panel and slapped his clawed hand against it. Nothing happened. Then he saw it. Embedded in the wall next to the door, exactly at eye level, was a knife. A human combat knife, its black blade gleaming in the faint starlight coming through his window. A small card was attached to the handle. Vexitar pulled the knife free. The card had one word written in perfect Draxian script. Soon. His blood ran cold. He smashed the emergency call button repeatedly until station security finally responded. When they arrived, they found nothing wrong with his quarters. All systems functioned normally. The knife was logged as evidence, and Vexitar filed a complaint about the human diplomat. But deep in his mind, a seed of doubt had been planted. Down in the human embassy, Taesung reviewed the security footage of Vexitar's quarters. The alien had examined every corner of his room, checked every vent and access panel. Good. Let him search. Phase 1 complete, Heejin reported. His complaint has been filed. Station security dismissed it as harassment, but not a threat. Perfect. Taesung pulled up the station security network. With Heejin's help, he'd already gained access to cameras throughout the station. What's his schedule today? Jiwoo consulted her displays. Council session at noon. Private meetings with Calroon and 2 other delegates in the afternoon. Dinner at the Serpent's Den, that Draxian restaurant on level 7. He'll walk through corridor C-17 to reach the restaurant. At 1800 hours. Taesung smiled slightly. I'll be there. 6 hours later, Minseo arrived at the embassy. She was smaller than Jiwoo expected. Barely 5.5 feet tall, with short black hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She carried a sealed container that required 3 different authentication codes to open. Reaper, she greeted Taesung with a nod. Shadow, he replied, using what Jiwoo assumed was her old call sign. They embraced briefly, then Minseo set the container on the table and opened it. Inside was gear Jiwoo had only seen in military documentaries. Advanced optical camouflage, micro-drones, signal jammers, and weapons. Lots of weapons. I brought your favorites, Minseo said, pulling out a compact rifle that could fold into a package no larger than a datapad, modified for station use. Non-lethal rounds, but they'll put down anything short of a battle mech. Tae-sung examined each piece of equipment with the care of a craftsman checking his tools. Good work. Any trouble at customs? Diplomatic immunity is wonderful. Min Seo grinned. They scanned the container, saw it was registered to a human diplomat, and waved me through. Idiots. Jiwoo watched them work together. It was like watching a perfectly synchronized machine. Min-seo would hand Tae-sung a piece of gear without him asking. He would check it and set it aside, already reaching for the next item. Years of working together had created an almost telepathic connection. What's the target package? Min-seo asked. Draxian ambassador. Name's Vextar. Arrogant, physically powerful, but psychologically weak. He made the mistake of striking me in front of the entire council. Min-seo whistled low. Fatal mistake. What's the play? Full psychological warfare. I want him isolated, paranoid, and broken before I make the final move. His compound has 30 guards, all ex-military. Advanced security systems. Hard target. We've hit harder. Yes, we have. Tae-sung finished his equipment check. You'll run interference with station security. Keep them distracted. Hyojin will manage our electronic warfare. Jiwoo monitors communications. I'll handle the direct action. Like old times, Min-seo said with satisfaction. That evening, Vextar walked through corridor C-17 on his way to dinner. His personal guards flanked him, 4 heavily armed Draxians who swept the corridor with professional efficiency. They detected nothing unusual. Vextar was halfway down the corridor when he saw a figure standing in an observation alcove ahead. The human, Tae-sung, just standing there, hands in his pockets, watching. You, Vextar growled. He gestured for his guards to keep walking. Come to apologize. Or perhaps beg for mercy. Tae-sung said nothing. He simply stood there, completely motionless, his eyes locked on Vextar. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 20. 30. Are you deaf, human? Vextar demanded. Tae-sung tilted his head slightly. Then slowly, deliberately, he smiled. The expression never reached his eyes. One of the guards stepped forward. Sir, we should move. This could be— I'm not afraid of one unarmed human, Vextar snapped, but his voice carried less certainty than his words. Tae-sung raised one hand and tapped his wrist twice. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing around a corner. Vextar and his guards rushed after him, but the corridor was empty. No doors had opened. No side passages. The human had simply vanished. Check the security footage, Vextar ordered. His guards accessed the corridor cameras. The footage showed Tae-sung standing in the alcove, showed the confrontation, showed him walking away. But the camera that should have captured where he went showed only static for exactly 30 seconds. When it cleared, the corridor was empty. Vextar felt his hands trembling slightly. It was impossible. Humans didn't have that kind of technology. They were primitives, newcomers. Find him, he ordered. Search every corridor between here and the human embassy. I want to know how he did that. But deep down, Vextar was beginning to suspect that finding the human would be the least of his problems. Over the next 24 hours, Tae-sung appeared 7 more times. Each appearance was brief. Each time he did nothing but watch. Once he stood outside a window while Vextar was in a meeting. Once he was in an elevator when the doors opened, already inside, hands folded calmly. Each time, security footage showed him arriving but never leaving. Vextar stopped sleeping. His guards doubled, then tripled. He filed 17 complaints with station security. They investigated each one and found no actual crimes. The human was allowed to walk through public corridors. Standing in alcoves wasn't illegal. The fact that he disappeared after each encounter just meant he was good at avoiding cameras. But Vextar knew better. This wasn't random harassment. This was psychological warfare. The human was demonstrating that he could go anywhere, appear anytime, and Vextar's guards couldn't stop him. On the second day, things escalated. Vextar received a data package. Inside was detailed information about illegal activities the Draxian Empire had been conducting on the station. Weapons smuggling, bribery of council members, unauthorized surveillance, all documented with timestamps, recordings, and financial records. The package was anonymous, but Vextar knew exactly who sent it. When he tried to contact his allies on the council, he discovered his communications were being monitored. Every message he sent was somehow copied and distributed to council security. His private meetings were interrupted by random security checks. His accounts were flagged for audit. Within 36 hours, Vextar found himself politically isolated. Other delegates avoided him. His illegal operations were shut down by station security. And through it all, the human appeared and disappeared like a ghost. Always watching, never threatening, but always there. Calroon, the insectoid delegate, received a visit from Ambassador Sora. She presented evidence of the Draxian corruption and politely suggested that the Council might want to investigate. She also mentioned that Earth had detailed files on several other delegates' questionable activities, files that could remain private or could be shared. Earth's choice would depend on how the Council treated humanity going forward. The message was clear. We know your secrets, and we're willing to use them. By the third day, Vextar had barricaded himself in his compound with all 30 guards. His paranoia had become complete. He trusted no one, jumped at every sound, saw the human in every shadow, and then his communication system activated. A message appeared on his screen. Just 3 words, "I'm already inside." Vextar screamed for his guards. They swept every room, every corridor, every storage space in the compound. They found nothing, but they did find another knife. This one embedded in the wall of Vexatar's private office. A place that should have been impossible to access without passing through multiple security checkpoints and sealed doors. The card attached to this knife had different words, "Tomorrow night." Vextar stared at the message, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He realized with terrible clarity that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. He hadn't struck a weak diplomat. He'd struck something far more dangerous, something that had been waiting patiently for an excuse to show its true nature. He'd struck a predator, and now that predator was hunting him. The Draxian compound occupied an entire section of Kepler 9 station, a fortified area that served as both embassy and military outpost. 30 guards patrolled its corridors, armed with plasma rifles and protected by armor that could withstand most weapons. Advanced sensor systems covered every entrance. Automated defenses tracked movement throughout the facility. It was designed to be impenetrable. Tae-sung studied the compound from a public observation deck 3 levels above. Mincio stood beside him, reviewing data on a handheld device. Motion sensors on every corridor, she reported quietly. Pressure plates under the floor panels. Thermal imaging at all entry points. And that's just the stuff we can detect from outside. Vextar's inside, central chamber, 3rd level, surrounded by his personal guard, 8 of them his best soldiers. Mincio glanced at Tae-sung. "You know, this is insane, right? Even with our gear, getting in there is going to be nearly impossible." "Nearly," Tae-sung agreed. "But not completely." He pointed to a maintenance access on the compound's upper level. "Station environmental systems. The whole compound needs air circulation. They'll have guards posted at the main access points. But the secondary vents are too small for most species to use. But not too small for a human." "Exactly." Tae-sung checked his equipment one final time. He wore form-fitting dark clothing that would blend with shadows. His optical camouflage could render him nearly invisible for short periods. Micro-drones no larger than insects waited in a case on his belt. "How's our interference?" "Heejin has control of station security cameras in this sector. We've got a 30-minute window before the automated systems flag the loops as suspicious. Jiwoo's monitoring council communications. Sora is presenting her formal legal complaint right now, keeping the council distracted. And you? I'll be monitoring from the observation post. If something goes wrong, I'll create a distraction." Mincio handed him a small earpiece. "Stay on comms. If I say run, you run. No heroics," Tae-sung almost smiled. "When have I ever been heroic?" "Fair point. You've always been more surgical than heroic." They moved through maintenance corridors that most species never saw. The station's infrastructure was a maze of pipes, conduits, and access tunnels. Tae-sung had spent 2 days memorizing every route. Now he moved through them with confidence, his steps silent despite the metal floors. The secondary vent entrance was exactly where the blueprints indicated. Tae-sung disabled the alarm with a device Hyjin had provided, then carefully removed the grate. The shaft beyond was narrow and dark. "Going in," he whispered into his comm. "Copy that. I have your tracker. Good luck, Reaper." Tae-sung crawled into the ventilation system. The space was barely wide enough for his shoulders. He moved slowly, carefully, knowing that any sound could alert the guards below. Through grates in the shaft, he could see into various rooms of the compound. Guards on patrol. Empty conference rooms. Storage areas. He released his microdrones one by one. They scattered through the ventilation system, each one finding a position near a different room. Through the drone's cameras, Taesung could now see the entire compound layout. 30 guards, just as intelligence reported. 8 with Vextar in the central chamber. The rest distributed throughout the facility. In position, he whispered. Starting Phase 1, Heejin's voice crackled in his ear. Cutting power to Section 7. Now, a portion of the compound went dark. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in a dim red glow. Immediately, 6 guards moved toward Section 7 to investigate. That left 24. Taesung waited 5 minutes, patient, still. Then he moved to a grate above an empty storage room and carefully opened it. He dropped silently to the floor, his optical camouflage activating. To anyone looking directly at him, he would appear as a faint shimmer, easily mistaken for a glitch in the emergency lighting. A guard walked past the storage room, sweeping with his weapon. He glanced inside, saw nothing, and continued his patrol. Taesung waited until the guard turned a corner, then moved into the corridor. He placed a small device on the wall, activated it, and moved on. The device began emitting a signal that would interfere with the compound's internal communications. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to create confusion. Over the next 20 minutes, Taesung moved through the compound like a ghost. He placed 6 more jamming devices, disabled 4 security cameras, and most importantly, he began isolating Vextar's guards. One guard in the eastern corridor found himself separated from his partner. He tried to radio for confirmation, but the jamming made communication difficult. When he turned to go back, he found Taesung standing directly behind him. The guard's eyes went wide. He tried to raise his weapon, but Taesung was faster. A precise strike to the nerve cluster on the guard's neck, and the alien collapsed unconscious. Taesung caught the falling body and dragged it into a side room. 1 down, 23 to go. In the central chamber, Vextar paced nervously. His 8 guards stood at attention, weapons ready. They could hear the confusion in the compound. Communications were breaking down. Guards were reporting strange noises, shadows that moved wrong, equipment malfunctions. "What's happening out there?" Vextar demanded. "Someone report." Static answered him. One of his guards tried the door. It opened normally, revealing a corridor that looked completely empty. "Sir, should we investigate?" "No," Vextar snapped. "We stay here. This is what he wants. To draw us out, separate us. We remain together." It was the right tactical decision, but it wouldn't matter. Another guard disappeared. Then another. The compound security center went offline. The remaining guards began falling back toward the central chamber, trying to create a defensive position. But every time a group tried to move through a corridor, they found their path blocked by malfunctioning doors or disabled life support, forcing them to take alternate routes. Routes where Taesung waited. He didn't kill anyone. That would have been too far, even under the legal protection of defending himself. Instead, he neutralized them with non-lethal methods. Nerve strikes, chokeholds, tranquilizer darts from Minsio's special equipment. Each guard went down silently, efficiently. By the time the remaining guards realized what was happening, they'd been reduced to 15. Then 12. Then 8. The compound had become a nightmare. Emergency lights flickered. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't. Sounds came from empty corridors. And through it all, none of the guards had actually seen their attacker. They just kept finding their comrades unconscious with no sign of who had taken them down. In the central chamber, Vextar's 8 remaining guards had barricaded the doors. They stood in a defensive circle, weapons trained on every entrance. Vextar huddled in the center, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "He's just one human," one guard whispered. "How is this possible?" "Silence," another hissed. "Stay alert." The lights in the central chamber went out. Absolute darkness filled the room. The guards activated their weapon lights, beams cutting through the black. They swept the room frantically, looking for any sign of movement. "Emergency lighting!" Vextar screamed. "Someone activate the emergency lighting!" One guard moved toward the control panel. His light swept across the wall, across the panel, across. A figure stood right next to him. The guard jumped back, raising his weapon, but Taesung was already moving. A kick knocked the weapon away. A strike to the chest sent the guard stumbling. Before the others could react, Taesung had vanished back into the darkness. The remaining 7 guards fired blindly, plasma bolts lighting up the room, but Taesung was already somewhere else. One by one, the guards fell. In the darkness, Taesung was in his element. He'd trained for situations exactly like this during the resource wars, night operations. Zero visibility, superior enemy numbers. These were the conditions where human evolution gave them an advantage. Humans were pursuit predators. They hunted in the dark. They hunted for hours, days, until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. 7 guards became 6. 6 became 5. 5 became 3. The last 3 guards stood back to back with Vextar in the center. Their weapon lights swept continuously, but they saw nothing. Heard nothing. Just the sound of their own breathing and Vextar's whimpering. Then Taesung's voice came from the darkness. Calm, professional, terrifying in its lack of emotion. Send them away. What? Vextar's voice cracked. Send your guards away. This is between us now. Or I'll keep taking them down one at a time and you'll have to watch. Don't listen to him, one guard shouted. We can... A tranquilizer dart hit him in the neck. He dropped like a stone. 2 guards left. Last chance, Taesung said. Vextar looked at his remaining guards. He saw the fear in their eyes. These were trained soldiers, veterans of real combat. And they were terrified. Go, he whispered. Leave us, Sirka, go! The 2 guards hesitated, then retreated toward the door. They left quickly, grateful to escape. The emergency lighting finally activated, bathing the room in red light. Vextar spun around, trying to locate the human. He held a plasma pistol in his shaking hands. Taesung stood on the opposite side of the room. His suit was disheveled. Sweat dampened his hair, but his eyes were calm, focused, utterly cold. He wasn't even breathing hard. You wanted to see what humans are capable of, Taesung said quietly. 30 guards. Advanced security. Home territory, and I walked through all of it to reach you. Do you understand now? Vextar raised his weapon. Stay back! Do you understand? Taesung took a step forward. We didn't become the dominant species on Earth by being peaceful. We became dominant because we're very, very good at controlled violence. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 12 hours after the incident in the Draxian compound. Every delegate was present. The tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a knife. Vextar sat in his assigned seat, but he looked like a different being. His scales had dulled to a sickly gray. His hands trembled constantly. He stared at nothing, occasionally flinching at sounds no one else could hear. The council's medical staff had examined him and found no physical injuries, but the psychological damage was obvious to everyone. Taesung entered the chamber in his diplomatic suit, perfectly pressed as always. He walked calmly to the human podium, placed his documents down and waited. Behind him, Jiwoo and Ambassador Sora took their positions. If anyone noticed the slight stiffness in Taesung's movements, the faint bruises on his knuckles, they didn't mention it. Byung-ho, the council's security chief, stepped forward to present his report. He was a tall, thin alien from a species known for their analytical minds and obsessive attention to detail. His investigation had been thorough. The incident at the Draxian compound has been fully documented, Byung-ho began. His voice carried clearly through the chamber. 30 Draxian guards were neutralized over a period of 47 minutes. All sustained non-lethal injuries. Most will recover fully within days. The compound's security systems were bypassed using techniques I've never encountered before. He pulled up holographic displays showing the timeline of events. The human diplomat entered through a maintenance vent. He moved through the compound using optical camouflage, electronic warfare, and sophisticated tactical awareness. Most significantly, he accomplished this alone. One individual defeated 30 trained soldiers on their home ground without killing anyone. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Several delegates leaned forward to study the data more closely. However, Byung-ho continued, my investigation revealed something more important than the incident itself. It revealed what we've been dealing with all along. He pulled up new displays. The human known as Taesung has a military history. I've spent the past 6 hours accessing Earth's military databases, which they've graciously opened to this investigation. What I found was enlightening. Images appeared. Taesung in combat armor, Taesung receiving medals, Taesung leading troops through urban warfare, the before and after photos of his operations. This individual is not simply a diplomat, Byung-ho explained. He's a veteran of Earth's resource wars, one of the most brutal conflicts in human history. He led special operations units that specialized in asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, and surgical strikes. His unit completed 47 missions with 0 failures. He was known by the call sign the Reaper. The chamber fell silent. Even Calroon, who had been one of humanity's harshest critics, sat perfectly still. But this is just one human, Byung-ho continued. So I researched further. I examined Earth's military history. Not just recent wars, but created submarines that could hunt silently beneath oceans, built nuclear weapons powerful enough to destroy their entire civilization, and then remarkably they developed the social structures to restrain all of this violence. They chose diplomacy not because they're weak, but because they're so good at warfare that they terrified themselves. Ambassador Sora stepped forward. May I speak? The council head, an elderly being from a species known for their wisdom, nodded. Please do. 3 years ago, Earth made first contact with galactic civilization, Sora began. We were excited, hopeful. We saw thousands of species living together in relative peace, and we wanted to join that community. We offered friendship, partnership, mutual benefit. She paused, looking around the chamber. Instead, we were treated as primitives, mocked, exploited. And when we sent a diplomat to formally request trade rights, he was publicly assaulted by a council member. She gestured to Tae-sung. We didn't send a soldier to this station. We sent a diplomat who happens to have a soldier's background. There's a difference. A soldier would have responded to Vextar's assault with immediate violence. A diplomat endured it, documented it, and only responded when legally permitted to defend himself. Defense? Calroon finally spoke, his mandibles clicking nervously. He destroyed an entire security force and killed no one, Sora countered. Every single guard will recover. Tae-sung could have been lethal. His training certainly allows for it. Instead, he showed restraint. He demonstrated what humans are capable of while proving we choose not to be monsters. The council head studied Tae-sung carefully. What do you have to say for yourself, diplomat? Tae-sung stood. His expression was calm, but there was steel behind his eyes. I came to this station to represent Earth's interests through peaceful means. For weeks I endured insults, mockery, and deliberate humiliation. I remained professional because that's what diplomacy requires. But when Ambassador Vextar struck me, he crossed a line. Not just legally, but symbolically. He was testing whether humanity would accept physical violence against our representatives. He looked directly at Vextar, who flinched. I answered that test. No, we will not accept violence. Yes, we will respond. But we'll respond with measured force within legal boundaries and with the goal of teaching rather than destroying. Teaching? Another delegate asked. What lesson did you intend to teach? That human diplomacy is a choice, not a weakness. That our civility shouldn't be mistaken for inability. That we're perfectly capable of violence, but we've chosen a better path. Tae-sung's voice remained quiet, but it carried absolute authority. Every species in this council evolved to survive their homeworld's challenges. Draxians developed physical strength. The Hive Collective developed coordinated swarm tactics. Humans developed something different. We developed the ability to plan, to adapt, to hunt prey for days until they collapsed. Then we turned those skills on each other and spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare. That's our evolutionary advantage. Not strength. Not speed. Strategic thinking and absolutely ruthless efficiency when necessary. The chamber was absolutely silent. But, Tae-sung continued, we also developed philosophy, art, literature, and law. We learned that civilization requires restraining our capacity for violence. We're not here to threaten anyone. We're here to participate in galactic society as equals, but equals mean we won't accept being treated as inferiors. The council head turned to Vexitar. Do you have anything to say? Vextar tried to speak, but his voice came out as a croak. He shook his head. Then I will say it for you, the council head declared. Ambassador Vextar made a terrible mistake. He judged humanity by their brief time in space rather than their long history of survival. He assumed diplomatic behavior meant weakness. He was wrong, and he paid the price for that assumption. The question now is, will the rest of us learn from his mistake? Calroon rose slowly. The Hive Collective wishes to revise our previous position. We support Earth's petition for trade rights. We also wish to establish formal diplomatic channels and cultural exchange programs. It seems we have much to learn from humanity. One by one, other delegates voiced similar sentiments. Some were motivated by respect, others by fear. But the result was the same. Earth's petition was approved unanimously. Admiral Yuna arrived at the station that evening, leading a small fleet of human ships. She was older than Tae-sung, with gray in her hair and the calm confidence of someone who had commanded vessels through real combat. She'd been his superior officer during the resource wars. They met in the embassy, away from the political theater. "You made quite an impression," she said. "I showed them what they needed to see," Tae-sung replied. "Nothing more, nothing less. Earth Command is pleased. The Council has agreed to all our terms. Trade routes, embassy rights, full membership within 2 years." Yuna studied him carefully. "But I'm concerned about you. That kind of operation takes a toll." "I'm fine. Tae-sung, I've known you for 20 years. You're not fine. You went back to being the Reaper, even if only for a few days. That's not something you just turn off." He was quiet for a long moment. "Someone asked me recently what I am, human diplomat or human weapon. I told them I'm a reminder. A reminder that humanity chose diplomacy after learning exactly what the alternative costs." "And do you believe that? That we've really moved past our violent nature?" "I have to believe it. Otherwise, everything I did during the war, all those operations, all those people I hurt, it was all just pointless violence." He looked out the window at the stars beyond. "We sent soldiers to prevent wars. We used violence to create peace. That only makes sense if we actually achieve lasting peace afterward." Yuna placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did well. You showed them we're not to be trifled with. But you also showed restraint. That's the balance Earth needs. Warriors who understand peace. I'm not a warrior anymore. I'm a diplomat. You're both. And that's exactly what we need." 2 days later, Jiwoo found Tae-sung in the embassy library, reviewing documents for the next council session. He looked like the mild-mannered diplomat again. The cold, calculating soldier had been carefully locked away. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. That last thing you said to Vextar in his chamber. About humans being good at controlled violence. Did you mean it?" Tae-sung set down his datapad. "Every word. Humans aren't the strongest species. We're not the fastest or most technologically advanced, but we're survivors. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us in every possible way, and we not only survived, we thrived. We became the apex predator not through any one advantage, but through our ability to adapt, to plan, to work together, and when necessary, to be absolutely ruthless in achieving our goals. That's terrifying. Yes, it is. That's why we work so hard to be diplomatic, because we know what the alternative looks like." He smiled slightly. "The Galactic Council will remember this. They'll remember that humanity chose peace even when we could have chosen war. And they'll remember the cost of forcing us to demonstrate our capabilities. Do you think they'll respect us now?" "I think they'll treat us as equals. Whether that respect comes from admiration or fear doesn't really matter. What matters is that Earth has a seat at the table, and no one will casually dismiss us again." That evening, Calrun requested a private meeting with Tae-sung. They met in a neutral conference room, just the two of them. The insectoid delegate looked uncomfortable, his multiple limbs shifting nervously. "I wanted to apologize," Calrun said. "I participated in your humiliation. I voted against your petition. I was wrong." "Apology accepted," Tae-sung replied simply. "May I ask you something?" "Go ahead. What are you really? What should we call your species?" Tae-sung considered the question. "We're humans. We're the species that climbed down from trees, crossed continents on foot and decided the stars weren't far enough. We're artists and warriors, scientists and poets. We build civilizations and sometimes destroy them. We're capable of tremendous compassion and terrible violence. We're contradictions that somehow work." "Your death in a suit," Calrun said quietly. "No," Tae-sung corrected. "I'm a diplomat who knows what death looks like. There's a difference. Death doesn't negotiate, doesn't show mercy, doesn't give second chances. I did all those things. That makes me human, not death." Calrun was silent for a moment. "We underestimated your species terribly." "Yes, you did. Don't make that mistake again." As Calrun left, Tae-sung allowed himself a small smile. The message had been delivered. Earth was no longer the newcomer to be exploited. They were equals, players in the galactic game with all the rights and respect that entailed. He thought about what Admiral Yuna had said, about being both warrior and diplomat, about the balance Earth needed. Maybe that was humanity's real strength. Not that they could be violent, but that they could choose when to be violent and when to extend a hand in friendship. The galaxy would learn to respect that choice. And if they didn't, well, there were more soldiers like him waiting back on Earth. Warriors who understood peace. Diplomats who knew war. Humans who carried both civilization and savagery in careful balance. Death in a suit. He supposed it was an apt description. But the important part wasn't the death. It was the suit. It was the choice to wear it.